What's up, y'all? I'm Tom, and this is Like a Math Class. In this video, we are going to solve trigonometric equations. Let's get to it. Now, before I start solving my trig equations, I always like to do a quick sketch of my sine and cosine function. So here we can see we've got our sine function. Here we can see we've got our cosine function. And over here, I've got my unit circle. The reason I've got these colored in is I sometimes like to look at this and think, okay, this is my first quadrant, this is my second quadrant, this is my third quadrant, and this is my fourth quadrant of the unit circle. And I do that so that when I'm looking at where the values are that I'm looking for on my graph, I can go back to my unit circle and kind of reference where I'm looking. All right, so let's look at our first example. So if I'm trying to solve where sine x is at negative root 3 over 2, actually let's copy this down over here. All right, so if we've got our sine function, we're going to be looking down here in the bottom part for negative root 3 over 2. So I'm looking at this spot here, and I'm looking at this spot here. Now these are going to be somewhere in my third and fourth quadrant. Now, how do I know which radian measurement this goes to? Well, I go back to my unit circle, which you'll see right here if you need a reference back to it. So I'm thinking back to my first quadrant of my unit circle, and the unit circle, it's going to go pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3. That's where my sine value is going to be at root 3 over 2. So root 3 over 2 is at pi over 3. So that means I've got some symmetry when I come down here, and that means as I go around this circle, I'm still going to be on my pi over 3 fractions. So I'm a little bit bigger than pi, so that means I'm going to be at 4 pi over 3 there. And over here, I'm going to be just a little bit smaller than 2 pi, which is going to be 5 pi over 3. So it's really that simple for this problem. Here's my negative sine values, and those things are just referencing back to my unit circle. So I didn't necessarily have to graph this, but it is nice to see where these things fall and how they reference back to the unit circle. But ultimately, my x values for negative root 3 over 2 is just simply going to be 4 pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3. Those are my two solutions for this equation. We got one more example to get to, but before we do that, if you don't mind, hit the like button down below, maybe even hit subscribe so you see when we update with new videos. All right, let's get to our next example. Our next example looks at solving cosine of x at 1/2 between negative pi and 2 pi. So we've got a different domain than we had up above. So let's take a look at what this would look like as a graph. So roughly speaking, here's my cosine graph. Might be off a little bit, but all I'm really doing is I'm using this to reference where am I looking at positive 1/2. And if I'm looking at my quadrants, here was again quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if I go backwards then, this is quadrant 4, and this is going to be quadrant 3 on the unit circle, but I'm going in the negative direction. So to find where it's equal to 1/2, I'm going to be looking at this line up here, and this is roughly going to be something in the negative portion of my unit circle. It's going to be looking at the first quadrant, and it's going to be looking at the fourth quadrant here. So what does that mean in terms of cosine? Again, as I go back to my unit circle, I'm thinking, where is cosine equal to 1/2? Cosine is equal to 1/2 at pi over 3 again. So we know that this is going to be pi over 3. And then as we go around our unit circle, this is like the same as going around our unit circle. So we have to be just a little bit smaller than 2 pi. If the denominator is 3 and we've got our pi, a little bit smaller than 2 pi will be 5 pi over 3. So what happens as we go backwards? Well, as I go backwards, here's quadrant 4, here's quadrant 3. As we go backwards around the unit circle, that's going to be negative pi over 3. So here our x values for cosine is going to be negative pi over 3, and 5 pi over 3. So these are our solutions between negative pi and 2 pi for where cosine is equal to 1/2. So that's pretty straightforward. We're just kind of referencing back to our unit circle. Maybe we're referencing our regular sine or cosine function. But what happens when we start changing the period on these things and we start applying some of those transformations? We'll get to that in the next video, and I'll see you over there.